Hey, I'm David Adelsheim. The story of Adelsheim Vineyard began in 1971. That was the year that Ginny and I decided to risk our life savings on a piece of property in Oregon's North Willamette Valley. Looking back now, we were one of just 10 families that made wine before 1980 from grapes planted on our properties in that region. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of what became our first vineyard, we wanted to tell our story. But we quickly realized that the only way to truly tell our story was to tell the stories of that entire first generation. Our winery team proposed an idea, a series of video conversations with the founders of those first 10 wineries and me. I loved it and set to work contacting my old friends. In each interview, we wanted to go beyond their widely known histories to discover who these people really were and what led them to build our uniquely collaborative, and at least from today's perspective, incredibly successful wine industry. This is our shared story. In some ways, Nancy and Dick Ponzi's entry into the business of wine in Oregon sounds very similar to ours. As Nancy wrote in her 2010 cookbook, it started in the 1960s. If you weren't alive then, it's difficult to relate. Young people such as Dick and me were searching for roots, and a path was presented by going back to the land, to basics and self-reliance. I wanted to better understand how back to the land translated into starting one of Oregon's legacy wineries. Nancy and Dick agreed to meet with us on October 14, 2020, outside their original winery next to the home they built. Well, we're in this beautifully manicured place with old bottles and some newer bottles and cookbooks, early label. This is all laid out for our conversation, I think.
Okay.
Hey, where did you grow up?
Well, I
What year?
started out in California, in Southern California, near where Disneyland is now. I lived there until I was about 10 years old in a very kind of normal working class home. My dad worked. He drilled oil wells. He was not the owner of the oil wells. He was the worker on the oil wells. And he worked away from home, so my mother ran the house, and I had a very older brother and sister that I didn't see much, and it was just delightful. And then when I was about 10, my father decided he would like to retire someday. And he had an opportunity to, at that time, this was 1952, Venezuela was booming with oil at that time. And he had an opportunity to go work there. So he did. So my family, my mother, my father and I moved to Venezuela. And they remained there almost 10 years. I mean, you know, back and forth. I went back and forth more than they did because the schools, even in Caracas at that time, there were no adequate schools for English speakers, and I couldn't go to school in Spanish. It wasn't that good. And so I went back and forth.
To Southern California.
Sometimes I went to Southern California. I went to Texas. I went to Arkansas. I wasn't a very obedient child.
Was wine part of you growing up?
Absolutely not. The only word I ever heard was wino. And my parents occasionally had a drink like it on a holiday or something.
Yeah.
No, the alcohol was not part of our life at all.
Did you drink wine before you met Dick?
Not really. I drank a lot of rum. Cuba Libre.
So Dick, your story with Italian immigrant parents, wine was certainly part of growing up.
Yeah.
And this was in?
This was in Pennsylvania. And my parents immigrated from Italy during the period of the major immigration, early 1900s. And I was born in Pennsylvania in a coal mining town. And
In Western PA.
yeah, that's right, Western. And as far as wine, the tradition, as most people have become aware of, is that the immigrants wanted to bring with them that culinary bit of winemaking and whatever foods they had. So they would make their own wines. Even during Prohibition, they would make their own wines. And at that time, the source of fruit was California. So the memories that I have is where in the fall, that was one of the major functions, was to get the families of the neighborhood. It was an Italian neighborhood in Pennsylvania. And they would go down to the train yards and pick up their tons of fruit that they would get coming out of California. And it was always, I remember this because they wanted to create what they remembered from Europe, basically. And they understood Muscat and Zinfandel, which was the blend that they made, I guess, to make the style of wine that they're accustomed to. Probably trying to duplicate something from Burgundy or something, or from Chianti. So that was, I was raised in that household, garlic, olive oil, and wine. And the period of winemaking in the fall was always a very festive event. And I remembered that odor of fermenting juices. So it was a pretty indelible experience.
At some point, the two of you made a decision to leave these fun, relatively well-paying adventures and leave that behind and decide to go into winemaking. Was it more to move to Oregon, or was it specifically to make wine that you came here?
At that point, I mean, the story begins where I was out of a job, and the story is that we took a trip. Had no work, so we took a trip across the United States. We had 2 children at the time, and Nancy was pregnant. And so we left our car in New York and took a plane flight to Iceland to visit my brother.
Yeah, it's really miserable to go across country pregnant. With somebody who doesn't like to stop the car. But while we were there, his brother's name is Frank. He had grown a crop of celery. I mean, he was doing cool climate and experiment. Well, he actually had grapes growing, but in a greenhouse. But he had grown celery, and he had a huge crop, and so he didn't know what to do with it all. And he read a little book, and the little book told him how to make wine. And you can make wine out of anything, as you know. Dandelion's only one of the many, many, many things. So he made celery wine. And he offered us some while we were there, and we, okay, sure. It wasn't bad. It kind of tasted like white wine was supposed to taste, and we were very impressed. And then we had been experimenting with making some wine in California on a very small scale. And he told Dick his secret was this little handbook of a guide to home winemaking, I think it's called. We still have the copy. And it revealed the secrets of wine. It's called Don't Let It Get Oxidized.
Well, when we get back home, we're going to find some grapes and we'll make some wine and see how well it turns out. And it was right about harvest time by the time we arrived back home. Again, I kind of felt to my childhood days that let's give it a try with the kids, the little kids, 2 and 4.
They were 2 and 4.
And give them an experience. Well, we went out, we picked the grapes. We brought the grapes home. It was a great experience picking the grapes and bringing it home and crushing it and in the garage, I remember very well. And the kids disappeared, and there Nancy and I were through the night, squeezing and pressing and doing all we had to do. And the kids could care less, of course. But as it turned out, the wine was absolutely surprising. And that's what turned our mind to it.
None of us were farmers. None of us knew anything about being farmers, but we decided we'd like to go live on a farm. So we brought all of our books on farming and we moved on to farms.
We made trips back up to Oregon and visited with her parents. And there was a mention from her parents that there was somebody in Oregon making wines. And that happened to be Summers. So on our trips up, one of those trips, we stopped by and saw what he was doing. And for what we could tell, he was making wines like we made back home. Whiskey barrels and whatever containers we could find. So that is what triggered, basically, the idea, the combination of what you're saying, the unrest and the displeasures of what was happening, and to get back to the land with our Whole Earth catalog and some knowledge of winemaking, because I read the book. And it was just kind of a dream then that let's give it a try.
My mother called, and she said that this friend of hers had a rental house that they had sold, but they thought the guy was pulling out and would be interested. And so 10 minutes later, we called back and we said, we'll buy it.
Well, wait a minute. We did some research. We asked what was the size of the house, how many bedrooms, and what did it look like, and they're relatively new.
And you went online and researched it.
Yeah. It had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a kitchen. That was about it.
Yeah.
So that sounded fine.
But you didn't have a job. You didn't have a job.
But we didn't have a job.
No, there was no job waiting here. No, we just, I think, again, the commonality with everybody here is you just figured something will turn up. I can do something. Dick could go help people build something, whatever. I could teach something. We didn't really worry about that too much.
Yeah.
If we were the Lone Rangers here, like Summers was for a long time, I don't think it would have gone as far as it has.
I came down here and it was really awful, but it was for sale and we could afford it. And at that time, we have to go way back in time. We thought, like Napa, that it should be flatter and with good southern exposure. You make your little checkoff list. Yeah, we needed to be New York City.
And it seems to me, Nancy, that you and other women in Washington County came up with a role.
Yeah, we did. And again, have to go back in time. This is 70s.
Yeah.
This is 70s.
You can't apply today's.
This was a time when, my daughters cannot believe it. When I wrote a check, I had to sign it Mrs. Richard Ponzi. I didn't even have a name. So it was a different time.
Yeah.
So, we did what we could. And so obviously all of us worked like crazy to make this thing happen. But then it got to this point of realizing, okay, well, this is fine. We've got some barrels and we've got some vineyards and we've got this, but now we've got to make some money. And we have to sell this. So we did. We got together and tried to think how we could sell it. We've got a whole city up here. They should come out and see what we're doing. So we started attracting them. I made friends with people in the food department at the Oregonian, and they were excited, something new to write about, so it was really easy. I mean, you could give them all kinds of stuff, and they would write about us. And we also, Maria tells about putting the pretend table up out in the garage, and a beautiful bouquet of flowers. You always have to have flowers. And some clean glasses, and smile a lot, and people come and they have fun.
I always think of the 70s as a time for learning how to establish a vineyard, and then towards the end of the 70s, how to make wine. And we shared all of those experiences.
I mean, it seems like second nature now, but we must have somehow learned that you can do a wine dinner with 2 other wineries,
Yeah.
and that you would somehow make that work.
Yeah, and I think part of why it worked, not only did we have different representations, but we were nice to each other. We would say, oh my God, you have to taste this Adelsheim wine. This is really good. And it didn't cost us anything to do that, because we knew if your wine got their attention, eventually they'd get around to us, they'd get around to the other people. So there was truly that feeling of not competing, but really working together to everybody's advantage.
And it didn't hurt that we were actually friends beyond appearing in public together.
We had a fun time on those trips, the ones I went on.
Do you remember being on a quest for a style of Pinot?
Well, one thing for sure, I think it's because we drank a lot of Burgundies in California, but I probably forgot about it, I don't know. But I think we saw like Zinfandel in California that went crazy with extractions and never you couldn't deal with it if you're going to eat a meal. It would dominate a meal. Well, I'll tell you this, and you probably did the same thing. I was doing a lot of things differently and tried to learn from the beginning. I mean, this was the whole thing. The equipment that we use, because my background is engineering, I even made a destemmer myself and used it and was incorporating things that I found out you shouldn't do. And so I think because all of us started with small fermenters, and every time you made an improvement, you wanted to see whether you were doing anything differently, learning anything, and whether you were going in the wrong direction. So how to treat the fruit and be as gentle and as less extraction and everything. So whatever appeared to be more reminiscent in my mind, in my memory of what I liked in drinking great wines, I guess I was trying to emulate that without overpowering it. Although you're tempted to, and the 85 was a change in my style, I think, because it was such a satisfying wine in that it was everything. It had all those components that you think about when you're making wines, and it just fit together. Well, we didn't know what we were creating, really. I don't think. I mean, Corey may have had a vision. We all talked about a vision, an industry. Dave Lett probably talked about it, but I mean, why? I don't think you could map it out. Well, we never had a business plan. Nobody that I know of had a business plan. Where were you going to sell your wines? Well, Portland is right down the road. We're going to sell all of our wines in Portland. And then you realize, wait a minute, no.
Well,
That's right.
I'm going to drink one more.
Okay. I think I got a fruit fly, so I'm not going to
well,
drink, but that's okay.
I think a fruit fly in the wine is always a positive.